Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hello and welcome. And if you are a consistent listener, you may be saying, I haven't heard from you all in a while. And that is true. And that is because we've had a little sickness going around and there was enough of us out.
Down with the sickness.
Now, that's what I call coronavirus volume 19.
Yes, volume 19.
I was going to let them call themselves out. I wasn't going to call them out for it.
Yeah.
But
the ones that had it just did it. So yeah, we called ourselves out. A little under the weather for a bit.
I thought of it as COVID-19 having me. You know, came down with a case of me.
It definitely takes you out.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
you
for
were
sure.
being cuddled by the corona.
It is the dominant one in this relationship.
We took turns resting, me and the virus.
But we are back and maybe a little bit, a little bit foggy in the brain,
depleted.
And little depleted. But some of us are feeling a little bit punchy today, and I'll let you guess who that is. It's me. I'm the problem.
Punchy.
Tell us why you're punchy. I mean, that's pretty exciting. You've had a big day.
When you say punchy, you mean like you want to punch, or like is punchy better than stabby?
Punchy is kind of like stabby with like a humorous kick to it. I think.
Killing me softly
without the attempted murder charge.
Set your phasers to stun.
Yeah, punchy is more like a slight, stabs, but with a smile on my face while I do it. So
it's like being stabbed with a feather duster over and over again.
No, I just, to be honest with you, I've gotten to teach a lot in the past couple days, which is what I love to do. Awesome. Is just to talk to people about plants. And I've talked to middle schoolers and high schoolers and garden clubs. And it keeps me fresh, keeps me alive. And I enjoy that.
So
part
punchy's
of my job.
good.
Yeah. Just don't come at me because I will also stab you.
You're high
just
key.
kidding.
You're keyed up.
I'm keyed up. I know. I just like the word punchy. It just feels good.
I know. Yeah, I was just clarifying what I didn't know.
Feeling punchy today.
I'm not on TikTok, Alexis, so I don't know what the new words
know what?
mean.
I actually heard that term used by another podcaster.
Look at you.
So, and she goes, "We're punchy today, y'all," and they're always, it just seems right. Just feels good. But today we are talking about fall cover crops, and we have talked about cover crops on here before. We've talked about why they're great. Some of the summer ones that you can do, but we're at the period in fall, and we're about getting close to the time where it's up for cover crops. Like you don't have much window left to be planting them. So if you're hearing this right now, get to the store, get on the internet, wherever you're going to buy your seed, and get to ordering if you're wanting to put that down. And I can tell you from personal experience, I am always late. I never get it down at the right time. Like, I don't know if anybody else, but it can be hard. Your tomatoes are still producing maybe, or, you've got some good garden stuff still in there.
You don't want to do the cover crop until everything's done.
Yeah.
Done.
It's not always the way it works because it needs to have enough time in there.
I guess it depends on the person, because there would be many a time where I would just be thrilled to knock everything down and put in a nice, clean bed
Brett,
of wheat.
100%. I've knocked down all my tomatoes, as I've confessed in earlier episodes, maybe the last episode. I think we talked a little bit about that, like ending the garden. Well, Jennifer will not let me end her little round circles of flowers that I've tilled around with a garden tiller. I've tilled around every little round circle of flower, and I'm waiting to dispatch those into the netherworld.
No,
but I can't.
Crop circles.
Little crop circle, like little
miniature
crop circles. But yeah, Alexis, that's a great point, because I can't put down. I've got a crimson clover base mix. I got 10 or 12, things, and I usually put down a mix of things, of grasses and clovers, but I can't put them down yet. And I know something about crimson clover is that winter kills really bad, so I got to get that in soon. And also, one of the reasons that I put in a cover crop, specifically a fall cover crop, is that my garden is you've seen the backyard, it kind of slopes down to a flat area, then slopes some more. It has a little slope to it. So I desperately need that cover crop on there, because it's in a state of 90% being tilled right now. And I'm starting to see little washouts erosion. So I need to get that on ASAP. Yeah. And it's a timing issue for me. So those flowers, I can't guarantee how much longer the little crop circles of flowers will be in the garden. So yeah.
They're all going to get powdery mildew if they don't have it already.
They already do. They already do. It's just a matter of time. It's a slow death. I drink my coffee and I watch them decline. It's what I do in the mornings. Yeah.
Have you ever accidentally mowed them too early?
Yeah,
Made a
and Jennifer
mistake?
will accidentally do bodily harm to me. So yeah, she knows my
Talking about
nefarious
feeling
tricks.
stabby.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Jennifer. She's just straight stabby, not punchy. So yeah, she'll come and get me. So that's one of the reasons that there's lots of great reasons, I guess, you all to do a fall cover crop. But that's one of the main reasons that I do is to hold my soil on this ever so slight slope, but it's just enough to gather water, and it's just a big enough area to gather a volume and velocity of water to do a little washing. So that's one of the reasons I am anxious to get my fall cover crop in.
So that's
I know we're focusing on cover crops specifically, but just in case anybody's new to this time of year or they're new to gardening in general, a couple of the other things just to think about this time of year, and you can look into them as you're listening to the rest of the podcast, would be I just saw some of our growers are planting their annual strawberry plants in the next few weeks.
On plastic, typically on raised bed, plasticulture or plastic we've talked about before.
Yeah. And that's people who are growing them for annual production, almost or not almost exactly as an annual, like rather than a perennial or biennial crop. And then I think about garlic as another thing this time of year that people should be thinking about planting. We covered a little bit of the bulbs and other things that are fall planted last week.
Tulips,
and some of those woody perennials. So it's this time of year, there is a lot of activity, a lot of things that can be planted and grouped. And I always, kind of as fall comes on, those are the things that I have had in my mind when I was growing things more regularly. But Alexis, I don't want to digress us off of.
No, I heard somebody call spring or fall second spring the other day, and that I think can be very true. It doesn't have to be true, but it can be very true. So if you're tired, listen, I get it, and it's okay to terminate, and hopefully you can throw in some cover crop or whatever. But I was going to say a cool way to start talking about cover crop. So Ray talked about why he is cover cropped, and all of us have used it in some way in some point of our life. So maybe just talking about why you did in your situation might be a cool, and then we can talk about just some of our favorites, time line on those, and then kind of getting rid of them in the spring can also be something that terminating can be a little bit tricky depending on what equipment you have available for you. All of it is possible, but it's something to think about when you pick one. And we've talked about this with summer cover crops, and the same is true for winter. Some termination is easier than others depending on your scale. But for me, erosion is, I think, always, whether you're on a slope or not, is always something to be concerned with. But I have other ways of covering the soil. In my situation, I can cover it with a big black, plastic silage tarp and do a lot of that. But what I don't get by covering it up with silage tarp is I don't get that organic matter buildup. So I may get some weed suppression. I may get the warming of the soil. So there's great things to do. And I have a tarp down right now where I've pulled it over an area that I just could no longer look at because the weeds were so bad. We've talked about that as well. But I use cover crop both for weed suppression and because I have a pretty heavy clay based soil. So I'm really trying to break that up from where it was in tobacco a long time ago. And then in pasture, I have a little bit of compaction, some clod issues that happen. And so I'm trying to increase that organic matter in a cheaper way because I can add compost, I can add manure, as much as my phosphorus levels.
Are you adding a lot of taprooted things to your mix?
I was wondering, are you messing with any of the tillage radish stuff?
Yeah. I did daikon radishes the first time I did them, and they worked great. But I don't necessarily have like a hard pan per se. It's just I'm trying to prevent a hard pan because I have this type of soil that will do that. But they did do great. I even picked some or pulled some out that I like missed with the tiller and that got really large, and like we just sauteed them up and ate them because they were tasty.
Nice.
But I'm more going in with a mix of just both grasses and legumes because I really need some good weed suppression as well. But I need a lot of biomass.
Can you share names?
Yeah, I was gonna. Hold on, let me pull up.
What's the phrase?
I want to pull up the exact mix that
Names
I'm
don't
using
go with
There's
because I
so
was
stories or
many
something.
excited
good
about it.
mixes out there, especially for homeowners, on a agriculture scale. We've been doing that forever. And, the important thing to remember about as Alexis is, I'm killing time as Alexis is pulling that up, is if you have a pre-done mix, that's great. Those are readily available for homeowners and larger scale. Typically for homeowners, you get those mixes ready to go in the proper ratio. But if you're making your own mix, remember to reduce the total amount recommended. If it says a pound per 1,000 square feet or whatever, a lot of times you are reducing that by half if you're putting that in a mix. You don't want to double up if you're making your own mix. But
Yeah.
have you found that, Alexis?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
The seeding
for
rates are
some,
for a pure stand of just that.
right.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
For summer cover crops, I tend to like a straight species, and it's totally personal preference. Like that's just it's easy for me. That's the way my brain works. But for fall, since they're going to be in a lot longer, in theory, I like a mix, and I need various things. So the one I have is winter rye, field peas, ryegrass, crimson clover, and hairy vetch.
Hairy vetch is one of my absolute favorites. I love it. It's so consistent.
And
It's such a good cover
I
crop.
like a mix because if you don't have great success, like let's say I get this in a little bit late and the crimson clover doesn't end up coming up, that's okay because I have other things that can kind of help fill in that void. Because when I've done straight winter mixes, I have some things might be killed off easier than
Like
others.
the clover's bad about that. The crimson,
Yeah.
sometimes if it gets way, way below zero, like a couple of years ago, that killed a lot of crimson. So if you
Yeah,
had
I
the hairy
lost
vetch,
all
it
the
wasn't a problem.
crimson in
Yeah.
my mix last year, but the rye and the vetch did fine. So like I didn't
Mhm.
lose all my cover crop because it was a
Yeah.
mix. So that's one of the reasons I like to have a mix as a fall cover crop.
We've talked before about the biodiversity and the different root structures, the depths, and all the benefits you get from that. Because remember, the cool thing about cover crops is you have the top part and the bottom part. And Alexis has already kind of kicked us off into that conversation with like the radishes doing the mechanical, some of the penetration into the soil. So that's a cool thing about it. We look at the biomass on top and what's going on with the root system. So that's a great reason to use the mixes. I think is you kind of get that diversity naturally by selecting different things, a mixture of grasses and legumes.
What
Yeah,
about
so there's
you,
a lot
Brett
of
and
great.
Josh? You guys have worked in a lot of different not industries, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, it doesn't matter, but
Enterprises and places.
enterprises, thank you. So like how have you all used it, and what was your preference?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind recently, because these days I'm just a homeowner managing like a quarter of an acre of kind of the endemic polyculture of crabgrass and whatnot. I like to kind of overseed with white clover kind of around that
Mhm.
frost date and just kind of keep doing that to, I don't know, I guess influence the yard to be a little bit more
Yeah.
perennial, be a little bit more friendly to kind of pollinators, and be less of kind of a monocot
Just
forest.
really curious, how does that work for you? The overseeding with clover, because it's such a tiny seed. Does that work pretty well for you in a lawn setup? Just I
It
know we're
seems
veering off,
to.
but
It's
yeah,
definitely not something where it's like fat. It's not something that you get great results in the first season. It's
yeah, it's
something
one of
just to
those
kind
you
of,
do. Oh, what
yeah,
continuously, kind of make
yeah,
that
and then
something.
in the spring and the fall,
Okay,
yeah, and just kind of walk it over with a little organ grinder.
yeah.
Doesn't take long when it's a quarter acre.
We kinda laughed when you said crabgrass, but, somebody mentioned, it was last year, year before, and they had, hen-bitten chickweed out in the field, and it was
uh-huh.
absolutely looked like it was sown out there, and they said,
Mhm.
"Well, we're gonna leave it because it's holding the soil,
Mhm.
and we're getting that, top mass that we're gonna till under later, so why
Mhm.
not?" And that really made me take a step back. I was like, "Huh." It's yeah, I guess
Anything
they
can
were
be a cover crop if
yeah, anything can be a cover
Right,
crop.
right,
If it is, giving you those benefits, it doesn't have to be one of these, cereal grains or legumes or grasses that we're mentioning here today. But they
right,
said no, they get such a, that's a weed problem for them, but then it's not a problem when the way that their tillage patterns in the spring, they just mechanically kind of tilled it up and it was not a problem. But every year they had this, coming back, they must have had quite a seed bed. But I thought, wow, that's something to me, because that was their cover crop, chickweed and henbit. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really important point, is to think about, what is it that you want from this place? Because I'm not out there pulling out a bunch of like carbohydrates or biomass, right? I'm
Yeah.
not growing anything. I'm just kind of trying to subtly influence the
Yeah.
ground cover that's out there. Whereas you all are, pulling things off and
mitigate, like
you have
hay or
very specific
nitrogen, or
plans for, what families of crops you're going to be having come up, and trying to break disease cycles and all that
that
kind of
really
stuff.
the big on the larger scale, that becomes a big issue. And that's another facet of cover crops is, are you trying to make that be a nitrogen sink, where you're trying to capture excess nitrogen based on the production scheme for that year, so that you can sort of let the decomposition kind of add that to the soil at a later date. But yeah, that's another, on bigger scales, that becomes a big factor, as soil testing is used to determine exactly what kind of cover crop you need to capture what you're trying to do, and make sure that it stays there on site with the soil. Yeah, that's a good point, Josh.
I know it's not a popular opinion, but I prefer crabgrass to lobster grass. What do you?
As long as it's in Rangoon, I don't care what it is.
If it's
as long as there's plenty of butter while I'm eating either
fresh
of them,
and
I don't
local,
notice
with
the
enough butter,
difference.
you can eat lots of different things.
I know
I'm
that
not
Brett is
advocating for that.
I know that Brett is making a joke right now, but crabgrass is the pain of my existence right now, and it can go
I didn't know where you were
rot
going with
in
that. A pain in your
hell.
existence. Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I think
a lobster
sitting
grass fan has entered the chat.
Man, somebody has opinions.
from what I understand, in the grassland ecology lab, that looking at the steadily warming temperatures, apparently crabgrass is coming and here to stay, and will only become, like dominating our grasslands. So
it
make
is
your
words
peace.
that I cannot say on a recorded podcast while I am wearing my UK official gear. But just know I'm thinking them, and I'm thinking them
I
hard.
know you're not talking about your lawn, because I don't think you would care so much.
Lawn schmon.
Yeah. So what scenario has got you so worked up? Is it like in one of your production areas?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I have a couple different style of production areas because I like to keep things fun. I don't necessarily recommend that, but the place where it is the worst. So remember, I've converted pasture, and this will be my third growing season, and so of converted pasture. And I have perennial rows that are mulched, and in between those rows, I have plastic walkways. And so in that is where the crabgrass is taken over, because I've tilled up new area, and even though I've mulched, and I mulched heavy and well, and there's a good amount of perennials that have really started to take off in that area, the crabgrass is it's there. It shows up, and it is special. And honestly, like, it's worse than my like, I don't really have, knock on wood, a bad Johnson grass problem. I mean, it's there certainly, but a lot of people tend to have bad Johnson grass issues when they convert pasture, but mine is crabgrass, and it also comes up the worst place it comes up. And I finally had to just weed eat the entire row. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic, but like, this is why cover crops are so important to me, because of this crabgrass issue. So I finally just went in and just completely destroyed a whole row because I couldn't look at it anymore. And
How did you
I
destroy
also
it? Did you
used
kill it with fire?
a weed eater. I would just, I scalped it down.
Mechanical decapitation.
Yeah. And then I'm going to pull a tarp over it and go, when I do it. But
couldn't you sell like crabgrass as like some kind of foliar?
I gotta figure out something, man. I'm telling you what,
It's
like,
here to
as a
stay,
cute
like
little
Josh
seed
said.
pod,
It is
I
here to
just,
stay.
I
Right.
can't, I don't know. I almost can't give it that much because I
if you
hate
could come
it.
up with
I
a product for
loathe it.
thistles, surely
I loathe
crabgrass.
it in such a way that I don't think I could ever. If someone was like, I will give you $100 for crabgrass, I'd be like, no, I don't want to look at it. I couldn't
must
do
be
it.
killed.
It must die.
I know this is an aside, but crabgrass is so odd, and research, tells us this more and more. But most weeds, we say, if you're doing a chemical weed control, spray them when they're actively growing and young. Well, crabgrass doesn't adhere to that. You can spray it when it's young; it works pretty well. But in the middle of its growth cycle, when it's still somewhat young, it doesn't work at all. But when it gets older, the chemicals actually work better. So there's this strange dip in the curve. So crabgrass is very evasive.
Yeah.
even with chemical controls, it's really
Well,
interesting and
it's so like
persistent.
low profile, right? It like
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it is you know, it's not
hides
that it
out.
knows the blade is coming, but like it knows how weak the typical ways we control things like go right over its head.
It's
Yeah,
evil.
yeah.
It is evil. But anyways, cover
Well,
crops.
for
Cover crops
me,
can help you with crabgrass.
for me, conceptually, the ways that I've used it or thought about it using it, we mentioned it already, but I kind of these categories of things. So
Mm-hmm.
there's your
Mhm.
grasses, there's your nitrogen fixer legume kind of stuff, and then I think there's
Yes.
sort of like a third utility category that has other things that it does. We talked about tillage radishes. Sometimes
Yes.
people will
The
do
flex player.
types of mustard for like
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mhm.
fumigation and whatever
Hmm.
other.
Or if you need like a perennial crop, how about those, Brett?
Mhm.
Like if you need something more than 1 year, and I see that in production operations where you're doing something like alfalfa or, something that's gonna persist more than 1 year. Yeah.
But I think in addition to covering the ground both while it's actively growing and once you either cut it or knock it down, another way that I think of grasses is sort of like a this sponge that.
Mm.
So if we talk about fertility, when you get a soil test and you get a sense of how much fertility is in the soil and available to plants at that time versus how much will be available across time. Well, the reality
Yes.
is sometimes when we're going through a season, especially if you're adding fertilizer throughout the year, there's going to be a decent amount of free fertility hanging out in the soil profile toward the end of the season. And so when
Mhm.
you go and you put in something like a winter wheat, a winter rye, something like that,
Mhm.
what it's going to do is it's going to take and it's going to put down its roots and it's going to grow and it's going to use that nitrogen and it's going to use the other macro and micronutrients to build itself. And in the process, it's holding all of those nutrients in the stem and in the stalk and in the eventual
Mm-hmm.
seed heads, etc. And so when you plant that, what you're doing is instead of uh, letting that fertility wash out the bottom of your soil profile across winter, you're actually holding it in this live,
Mhm.
living
Yeah.
tissue in a way
Right.
that saves. It's going to save you money as far as fertility applications
Mm-hmm.
and et cetera down the line. Now, there's things you have to figure out when you go to terminate it and the timing and all that kind of stuff. And then
Right.
the nitrogen fixers are contributing to the fertility that's in the mix there. And as they're releasing nitrogen, some of it's getting taken up by those grasses and some of it's going back into the nitrogen fixers themselves. And so overall, when you get to the end of that period, you have this big, juicy green thing of biomass on top of your field growing, actively growing and fixing fixing atmospheric carbon and holding the soil profile in place and covering it and keeping some of those early weeds from germinating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go and you knock it down and it's like wringing out that sponge and all of those nutrients can actually just then be released. And whether they're directly released or they're released as food for microbes,
Mm.
that to me is what gets me really excited about,
Well, you touched on a
particularly
big one there
a
we hadn't
fall
touched on
cover
at
crop.
all, and that was weed suppression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge function of cover crops, in addition to all those awesome, amazing things you just talked about, is that, we talked about terminating a cover crop, which that's a big deal for small gardeners as well as larger farm operations because you have to have a plan. Is it going to be a chemical? Is it going to be a mechanical cultivation? You got to watch out for some of these things like rye, where it has early spring, a flush of growth that can get away from like home gardeners if they don't have proper equipment. But yeah, weed suppression is a big deal. Cover crops, because once they get in there and they kind of take up the space, you don't have weed bed from other maybe more noxious things such as crabgrass, Alexis.
Evil.
You don't have maybe those things to contend with. So it's like picking what you want to terminate at the end of the season rather than having fallow ground with lots of maybe invasive weed species coming in on you. So yeah, all of those are great points, Brett. Yeah, absolutely.
So, should we talk about some of the cover crops that can be seeded, September through November, at least in Kentucky and most parts of Kentucky?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, we've been in the season for 2 or 3 weeks now, for what can be seeded. I mean, you're talking about the rye, wheat, can all be seeded now. Winter oats are great because, as Alexis said, if you have something going on, winter oats can be. Although I've put in winter oats all the way at the end of October and had pretty good stands depending on the weather. Barley, all of that can go in now as
Has
far as
anybody
winter
ever done
cover.
triticale before?
I haven't. I've always heard it
Many
said
years ago.
triticale, but that doesn't mean that it's right.
Yeah.
Triticale.
Triticale. It's Latin. The language is dead. Okay? Nobody correct
Nobody.
me on my
And everybody who
pronunciation.
disagrees with Alexis also dead.
I told you
It's
I'm Billy
been,
Punchy and I meant it.
yeah, she is
Be
not
like a little
joking.
triticale salad.
Triticale
Triticale
It's
chip.
one
Triticale
that can go in.
salad.
Alexis, I think I put it in like the beginning of October, but it's been, oh gosh, 20 years ago
Yeah,
probably.
I've never used it, and I don't see it a ton in
I see it
mixes.
commercially more than I do for homeowners for whatever reason. And then it's not super common there in production systems like it was several years ago, at least locally. I'm just making local observations.
Yeah.
So
I always,
Austrian winter pea is another one that can
that's
be
one that's
good,
still
and you can
popular. That one's
sow
a popular
through
one.
October.
I
Yeah.
always thought of with the grasses that kind of wheat could be a little bit sensitive to not going too late into the season for planting, and rye was a little more flexible to go. If you basically if you missed a window where you wanted to plant wheat, you could go in with rye, as a last resort. But excuse me, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, on the
It's okay.
spring side of this equation, in general, cereal rye, and the one thing you mentioned, ryegrass earlier, Alexis, just to distinguish. So there's ryegrass and there's cereal rye, and so cereal rye is what we
Different.
typically think
Yeah.
of as like the most famous, probably, cover crops. Ryegrass is actually really interesting because there's both annual and perennial versions, but its root structure is like pretty gnarly and wild and extensive and
It's
deep.
aggressive.
Yeah, we had some that kind of persisted as weeds in part of our garden where we had used it, but the root system is pretty baller. But anyway, when you're selecting rye or wheat in the spring, there's going to be a lot more biomass with the rye. In other words, there's going to be a lot of bigger, thicker stalks that may be harder to terminate and knock down, etc. So if this is your first go round, you might try wheat as your first one. At least that was always our experience.
A lot of this, if it gets too tall, it does help greatly if you are a smaller operation that maybe have a person powered cultivator, like a walk behind type cultivator. You do not want to stick that into something that's grown up 36 inches tall because it's just going to wrap around the tilling tines and make you say really bad words. So a lot of times, if you have some way to mow that
Chop
before
it up.
you go in and try to, some way to chop it up. It's not such a big issue for commercial operations. They have ways of dealing with that, but homeowners, I find lots of frustration when they have that rye or whatnot out there. That's, number one, has a really tough root system, extensive root system, but then it puts on a lot of early growth. And by the time the seeding window is there and the ground is dried out and it's suitable for tillage, it's already too late to just go in with ground tilling equipment, smaller based equipment. So you have to usually add a point in the operation there, and that's to mow it or somehow chop it and then go in and do your tilling operation. So yeah, all of those are kind of
So
considerations to
do we
make.
have like a beginners cover crops? Here's a few species that have worked and are manageable and aren't gonna
Yeah,
grow to be 12
UK
feet
has an
tall.
older publication. It's literally called Winter Cover Crops for Kentucky Gardens and Fields. It's about 20 plus years, just a little bit over 20 years old now, but it's really good for larger operations, particularly here in Kentucky,
A
and small
vintage
gardens.
publication.
Yes, it has lots of information in a small amount of space, but it kind of follows along with the conversation we're having today and the way it breaks down things. It gives you nice charts for all the main categories, such as legumes and grasses. It kind of gives you considerations for each. And not only that, but more importantly for homeowners, it designates which cover crop species are most appropriate for home gardens. So if you look up that information, it's readily available online. Once again, the title is Winter Cover Crops for Kentucky Gardens and Fields. And I think the call numbers are ID 113 for those techie out there that want to just look it up by that. But great information in that. It contains basically all the talking points we've been going over today, except for crabgrass, Alexis. I'm going to continue to circle back to that. But lots of great information in there for homeowners and larger scale operations. So
And
look it up, folks.
that's a really good one. I also want to pull up a newer one, and it would be one that a
Yeah,
lot of
what's that
people
one?
would skip over because the title is Cool Season Cover Crops for High Tunnels in the
Oh,
Southeast.
yeah.
And so even if you don't have a high tunnel, check this out. It's some really cool tables in it with even more options. And what I like about it is, you know, you're looking when people are doing high tunnels, they're, looking at 1,000 square feet type situations. And so for a lot of people who are doing, intensive small farming or gardens, that's what you're looking for. And I like that this publication has certain comments in it that says like easy to terminate earlier and matures faster than rye. And so those might be something that you're like, I tried rye, I didn't like it. It was hard to deal with. Here's, some other things. It also gives you traits and tolerance. So it gives you traits such as nitrogen fixing, weed suppression, if it's a host for root knot nematode, which is a big thing that we're dealing with in high tunnels around these parts, and if it's a soil builder. So like I told you all earlier, I really need something that's a soil builder as well as a weed suppression. So I might go down through here and say I'm looking for something that says very good in both categories. And then I just, okay, looks like Pacific Gold Mustard is very good soil builder and very good weed suppression. So I might see if that will work for, the timing that I need, even in my fields, if it's fairly resistant to cold. So just something to think about. And it is, like I said, for the Southeast. So if you're in, Kentucky or Tennessee or somewhere close by, it could be helpful for you. And I think we can put links in the show notes, and we'll put those in there that you guys can check out if you want to. But there's lots out there. And I think why we're not necessarily going over every single specific one is because each of them have their own benefits. And you really kind of have to go through there. I mean, crimson clover, has a lot of great things, but from my perspective, it's also pretty. And so I
Yeah.
can
Looks
use it
nice.
even. I can even
Right.
use it for cut. So if there's another one, Phacelia is a great cover crop, and it's quick and it's really pollinator friendly, but it's also something that can be used as a cut. And so, I'm not using it predominantly for that, but if it's going to take up space and use space, then I want it to do as many things as possible for me or for my soil. And so there's just so many out there to go through. And I think at least the publications we've mentioned, in my opinion, do a pretty good job of kind of going through the benefits and disadvantages of each so that you can pick something that really works in your situation.
Everybody's situation's a little bit different. I mean, I've worked with people that they are doing a cover crop in the raised bed garden, and then there's other people that have, large commercial production fields. So it's all about what works for you and what you're trying to accomplish. And as Alexis mentioned earlier, your soil type and matching, what's needed for that soil and that situation, and cover crop can be kind of integrated into that based on needs.
I think
and
that's
fertility.
that one the thing you mentioned about it being pretty or being beautiful or attractive. I think that is a really good and overlooked point. And I honestly, especially like in a home garden, we get a little high-minded about the ecological implications of our 10 by 10 area. And in reality, the outcomes associated with that 10 by 10 area being something that looks really nice through the winter time and is this bright patch of green, maybe with some flowers sprinkled throughout it, and encourages you to get out there earlier next year.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be more of an overall net benefit in terms of than the impact of that little area being undercover, compared to a larger area. And so I think we don't always have to have efficiency or
No.
this really grounded, water plan, NRCS water plan for our 10 by 10, raised bed in the backyard. But I can say going out there and seeing some winter wheat, just like this green, verdant thing, as opposed to this dead kind of partially henbit covered
It's
crust.
got a flower on it. It's inconspicuous, but it's purpley.
It just looks like the ground has been strangled and is
very
like
matte,
purple
like
space.
muted. Henbit is
Yeah.
muted looking.
That's a
Yeah.
good point, Brett. Yeah.
And
And
real
and
quick,
uh, like Alexis said, crimson clover's pretty, and that's why I like it. It may winter kill. I don't care. I'm going to put it in every single mix I use,
yeah.
just because I like the way it looks in May. Right before I till it.
Do you all have
Yeah,
a
that's
good
a
way
great
to
point.
tell the difference between a nematode and a nemafrog?
I do not. How far they
I
jump?
just
I don't
ask him.
know.
I
I just
see.
ask him.
What's
Yeah.
the
You just
question?
ask
Is
them.
it
You
like
just make
So
conversation.
you toad or you frog? Just
oh,
Are you feeling froggy? That's
just
why
real
I
quick.
asked.
Just real
Yeah.
quick. Yeah.
let me hear you ribbit.
I should also plug the cover crop calculator that was developed
Oh, absolutely.
and
Oh,
released in the
was
last
that
like
was that
30
something that
days.
you developed,
Oh yeah, I
Josh? Is that
forgot. That
something?
was me too.
Oh
I just
yeah,
thought
that
it
was
was somebody.
Oh,
What I
you.
remembered is
yeah.
that somebody cool made something
We
cool,
just focus on the
but it
product,
was me.
whoever may have done it, whether it was
It
me
just
or
happens to be me. Yeah.
But yeah, I developed that in collaboration with the Hort Council and Dakota Moore. Kind of, it's set up to be of most value to people who are working with areas of management that are measured in kind of square feet, because a lot
Mhm.
of the
Love
recommendations
it.
are per acre. So this is for people who they've got a 10 by 10 or a 20 by 20, and it has all the recommended cover crops. There's also links to much deeper resources, but includes things like handouts on what are the benefits or what are these different cover crops best at providing, like
Mhm.
Where's that
biofumigation.
housed at, Josh? Is that
The,
where's that housed?
we can drop a link. It's on the
Yeah.
CCD website. There's a
Okay.
link to it, but yeah, we'll
Great.
include a link in the show notes, where you just pick your cover crop and you give it your area, and it gives you the range of like the high and low seeding rate.
Mhm.
while
Yeah.
we're plugging resources, I'll just say, so I work with the USDA SARE program, Sustainable Ag Research
Mhm.
and Education, and one of their hallmarks has been cover crops because it's the sustainable
Mhm.
ag practice that applies to a whole lot of different farms across different types of systems,
Mhm.
etc. And so they, if you, their website is just SARE.org. That's the main SARE website,
Mhm.
and you can go and find the southeastern region within that, and they have free downloadable PDFs of all of their things, all of their resources, including one called Managing Cover Crops Profitably, which has some
Mhm.
summaries and other things. And they also have a link to the Midwest Cover Crop Council's cover crop decision tools, which are also available online. So I think cover crops is something that has been heavily researched and broadly applied and used in different kind of fits and starts across time. But Sarah has supported it going back to the 1980s.
Mhm.
Um, are we going to talk
Yeah, the
about?
calculator the calculator drew heavily on that resource and provides links to those SARE resources and
Mhm.
a couple of the ones that we've talked about on this episode.
The calculator, Josh, did you say that takes into account, can you like do mixes with that also, or?
We not currently, we're planning on adding that functionality,
Awesome.
kind of coming soon. But right now you can kind of just get your basic,
And
I've
it
got
gives
this.
you like you
Gives you
said
the
seed
high and the low.
weights,
Gives you the
rates.
high and low rates.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
If you
Gotcha.
are hand seeding, if you're just tossing stuff out, which is what I do, go with the high rate. If you are doing this more methodically, then you can use the lower rate. But if you're doing this by hand,
Hand
go with the high
casting.
rate, and you will see all of your mistakes in a couple
Go
months.
big
Big
or
drifts
go
of
home.
seeds, yeah.
Yep.
This kind of boom and bust cycles all across the field, yeah.
So we talked a little bit about, or we've talked quite a bit about this is the time of year. This August, September, October window is when we usually plant these things. And just to ask a question or put we aren't fertilizing our cover crops, right? That's not something that we typically would be doing,
Correct.
No,
right? That's kind
you
of
would not.
counter to the whole goal here.
Especially if you have legumes, it'll work directly against that, and that's more for the
Mhm.
homeowners of, on the ag end, they kinda get that concept, but it's easy sometimes to miss that, on the homeowner side of things sometimes.
So
But yeah, yeah,
and then in general in
no
the fall we're
fertilizer.
trying to maybe if we can target to get seeds in the ground ahead of some rainfall that's going to come and germinate those crops, because that's one of the things that I
Yeah,
think if I plant this week or next week, if we don't get any rain between now and then, there really isn't going to
Hmm.
that much of a difference between putting it in today versus putting it in next week. Excuse me. And then are we doing really anything to them across the winter time? And then I guess we could talk briefly about just some termination strategies or approaches in the spring. Any other?
Before we maybe talk about termination, if you guys don't care, we'll back up a little bit. We kind of take it for granted within this group, but as far and Lexus started us maybe to touch on it was seeding method. I'm assuming that in the wintertime you have some kind of prepared seed bed when you throw down a seed mix. And Josh mentioned it earlier that, seed that you just cast on top of the ground, if it's not prepared at all, like a clover seed, even though clover seed's tiny, if you throw it on top of a existing something like a lawn, it's a lot of that's just going to perish. So my baseline assumption for like smaller plots of land is that you're casting this seed into a prepared seed bed, which is ideal. And if it's something like a clover seed, you're incorporating that somehow by either lightly raking, or even better, if you have like some kind of cultipacker of any size, or any implement that goes on the back of something that you can drag across to either physically drag the seed in just, ever so slightly if it's clover, or press the seed into the seed bed. So I thought it may be good to touch on that. You generally just don't cast on top of the ground. You will get better results with most seeds if you either press it in or drag it in to ever so slightly cover that seed. I guess it's possible if you have something like clover, if you just throw that on top of the garden and you don't want to till it a final time. I've had some luck with that, but not as good as making a basic pass, a tillage pass, and then seeding. You'll have better results if you throw that seed into a prepared seed bed at the end of the season.
Definitely, you want that good, like soiled seed contact.
Yeah, yeah. And where were you taking us, Brett? Before I veered off,
No, I think
you were
that's
taking
great.
us into termination.
You mentioned the cultipacker thing, and I think the raking and or doing the cultipacking is one of those steps that's also not super intuitive. So I appreciate you pulling us back. So when you say a cultipacker in a field environment, that's basically like this giant, heavy duty rolling pin, like giant rolling pin
Yeah.
that goes on the back of a tractor.
And there's different sizes now. They make, I'm more familiar with the one on the agriculture scale size where it's large, and they come in different shapes a little bit. Some of them are kind of corrugated, have individual rollers. The theory there is just to press seed into soil. So any way you can press it, even if you have a lawn roller and you throw down clover and press that in, you're going to have a lot better results than not pressing it in. If your seed bed, is tilled, you may have some success with small seeded stuff like clover without doing that, but you're going to have better results if you do rake it in or pack it in somehow. The key word there in cultipacker is the packer portion of that word, is that you're kind of pressing or packing the seed into the soil.
And on a very small scale, I'll tell you what I did in our backyard for maybe four or I get no eight 40-foot 50-foot long rows is I went and I put my feet right next to each other and I just kind of gradually shuffled.
I do
Step and
that all the
shuffle, step
time
and
with
shuffle,
grass
step and
seed and
shuffle.
other stuff. Yeah, I call it my duck walk method, but
Exactly,
yeah, and it
exactly.
works
You don't
fantastic.
have to
Yeah,
quack, but it does feel good.
it does feel, maybe it works better if you do.
Uh,
It certainly gets the neighbors wondering what you're
but it's
doing.
that pressure and that
Yeah,
weight, along with kind
perfect.
of pressing it in. I think
Love
that's
it.
and
Love it.
I've also done where I like kind of almost made snowshoes with some boards so that it
Hmm.
increased the
Yeah.
area. I also seen
Nice.
people use like a keg. They would,
Brett, so you have
That's
like
not what I use my
access to
kegs
mini
for.
kegs? Yeah,
yeah, we got them laying around over here. So
just everywhere.
uh,
They're just all over the
people
place. Yeah,
use a keg
yeah.
and roll
Oh
it.
yeah,
But
that's a
there
good
are
idea.
other options, and I like that.
Yeah.
I went a long time actually without even knowing what a lawn roller was because I didn't
Hmm.
really ever use one. And
Why? Yeah.
that's obviously like a really good solution to that too. But in general, I think that light cultivation followed by some sort of
Yeah.
packing step can really help with germination
Yeah.
and with the seed not washing away if we get a lot of heavy rainfall. But yeah, so then I was just saying, basically after you get it in the ground and it germinates, you're kind of done, right, for a little while.
Yeah.
Let you
Until you're ready to get rid
watch
of
your
it.
garden grow, so to speak, and then
Yeah, most cover crops, they don't need additional water once germination takes place. You're really not doing anything beyond that in a typical scenario.
and so then
It's kind of
when's the
watching.
next time we really need to be thinking about that thing that we put out? those crops we put out? When do we need to
Probably in
think about getting rid of them?
the spring. You're looking at your spring seeding dates when you need to have your soil ready to go, and sometimes that's easier said than done because we have wet springs sometimes here and where we live in the country. The weather doesn't always play really well with us. And the thing to remember that if you have a good thick cover crop, that soil is going to stay unworkable just a little bit longer with tillage equipment because it's doing what it's supposed to do, retaining moisture. In some cases, it's self-shading, it's keeping the soil cooler longer. So kind of keep that in mind and do your test. And one thing you'll never want to do is work wet soil because you're not going to get that soil structure back. So don't ever be tempted to terminate your spring cover crop when it's a little too wet.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to destroy all the benefits you've gained from that cover crop and then some. But I start looking at my spring planting dates, and then I look for a window on the calendar that the soil is workable. And then you kind of have to take stock of what your equipment is, whether it's going to be mow and then till or whatever process you're going to use to mechanically get rid of that cover crop. And in some cases, if you're a large scale producer, you're going to use chemical management as a burn down for maybe that and some other
If we
options.
maybe just another in that larger scale, and I'd love to hear what you do, Alexis. So in the larger
Mm-hmm.
scale, in addition to the chemical applications, there's also there's a specific tool called a flail mower, which is a specific type of mower that is such a powerful and cathartic tool to use if you're,
I'm gonna order mine today.
Yeah, because it just so rather than it spinning around like a clock, if you're looking down, it actually spins around a shaft that's almost like in the same direction as your wheels, and it's got these little blades on it that chew up and it'll just chew up and spit out just about
Obliterate.
anything.
Yes,
Yeah.
into tiny pieces.
And so large scale organic farms, or even moderate scale organic farms that aren't doing any chemical treatment, they'll often mow it down with that. But they also make those attachments for walk behind tractors, like a BCS or a Grillo, those types of walk behinds, and it's a very powerful tool. But you don't have one yet, Alexis. What have you done up until now as far as terminating cover crops?
So I till mine in, or I will cover mine with a silage tarp. And so if they're if they've gotten really tall, so if they're more than 2 foot tall, then I will mow them first. I'll mow them down, and then I will cover and get that soil heating up and get those microbes moving and doing that. And then I'll go in until after some of that stuff has broken down and died off. But one thing we haven't mentioned for that, I have some friends who are organic no-till growers, is that they are crimping. And so crimping is usually done. You see this even in large like pumpkin production as well. But it's great for weed control and if you're doing no-till or low-till situation. So essentially what that is, it's something you're going to use with a grass. You're not going to be using this with a broadleaf, a legume or something. So if you're doing wheat or rye, something like that, you could do crimping. On a small scale, this looks like someone with a 2x4 that has a rope attached to either end of this, 2x4 that might be 3 foot long, 5 foot long, whatever. And they are literally stepping on that 2x4 and crunching the grass down. And so what they're doing is they're crimping that vascular system. They're bending it in half, just like a straw, just kind of like cutting it in half. And so there's no longer water and nutrients flowing up that stem. And so then it dies. The top growth dies back. So you can go through and do this crimping. There are large scale crimpers that you can pull behind a tractor. But I have friends that actually have done this by hand, and then they plant into that. So they use that crimped, laid down mat of wheat and rye as a weed suppressant, as a mulch essentially. And then they will actually either like make slits that they can plant into, or they will use like a small little like hand drill auger and auger little holes, and that weed, and then they'll plant down into there. So that's kind of a cool thing, and if you have a small garden, can be done really really
Crimping
successfully.
Fun fact worth mentioning about the crimper at that small scale, that tool. is also really great at making crop circles. If you want to be weird,
If you want to have
it's
a
the
great
same tool.
Halloween,
Yeah.
it's the same
Or if
tool.
you know
Yeah.
people who are into making crop circles, ask to borrow their crimper.
There you go. See, perfect.
And
If you have
timing
some alien friends who are into that, ask to borrow their crimper.
They have one.
and timing with the crimping, is that I remember that kind of being,
Yes.
because like
Yeah.
if you do it too early, essentially the grass is just going
It
to
doesn't
stand
work.
back up.
Yeah. So you
Partially.
want to do this while it is starting to go to seed, but before that seed has matured. And so that can be the trickiest part about crimping, really with cover crops in general. I think that's kind of the trickiest part. It can be timing, but with crimping especially, you want it to be sending all of its resources into creating a seed head, and then you can kill it off pretty easily by crimping. But if you
Yeah.
wait too long, that seed will shatter, and then you have created a weed
Right.
problem for
So
yourself.
and they refer to that as the milk phase. Is that
Milk.
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
where you
if you
can
were to
squeeze the C's head and you get like
milky sap.
milky.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's not sap, but yeah, it's not. If it's clear, it's too late, or if it's dry, it's too late.
But
If it's
that's the
clear,
time
it's
where
too
if
early.
you were going to start an almond milk business, that's when you milk the the
Yeah.
the
You
oat.
milk your oats.
You
You
milk the
want to make
oats.
your own
Okay.
oat milk? Go
Oat
for
milk.
Yeah.
it.
That's how that happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Little rye milk, little turnip milk, you know?
Little turnip.
Little turnip milk. It's got some tang.
um, but
You
yes,
covered
and
some ground
and
got
today.
some bite to it.
yeah. But and then smothering. So cover crops.
Yeah.
Again, if you're no till or low till, or just you don't maybe even have time, silage tarps can be a great way. It does take longer in the spring than it does in the fall because it's usually temps aren't as high. So you're looking at wanting to move that silage tarp. And remember, for those of you who are like, what is a silage tarp? Totally fine. It is something that does not allow water or air flow through there. And it's usually black on one side and white on the other. Any type of black plastic would work. So if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever and get some black plastic that is truly black plastic and doesn't allow water through, that would work on a small scale. I've got large ones, so I pull them over and I terminate that way. But from a timing perspective, if you're going to do silage tarps, you need at least a month, depending on when you're going to terminate. So you need to plan for a month for that to kill off to get your temps where they need to be. When you're terminating a cover crop, usually we say, and you all feel free to chime in, but I like to give myself, if I'm just tilling something in, 2 weeks before I plan to put it, like to plant in it, at least 2 weeks. And that's just if I'm just going out as it is and incorporating it into the soil, 2 weeks for it to
Yeah, if
break
you're
down.
incorporating heavy cover crop into soil and if it's got too much moisture, that creates a lot of problems if you seal that off from oxygen. But that's usually on more of a commercial scale with like chisel plows and traditional deep tillage. But yeah, you got to be careful with that, of incorporating any kind of green matter like that under the soil where it may be trapped without oxygen. Then lots of bad things happen. So
Yeah. There was actually just there was a short course discussion about cover crops and cut flowers. I think it was earlier this week, but Dr.
Last week.
Dr. Jacobson was talking about that timing of when to lay it down or till it in versus when the plant has its need, because there is this kind of little zone of when the microbes still have to go through their process before it becomes available and starts like the cycle. Yeah, it's interesting with the timing.
But that say, once you find your cover crop that works for your needs, so you go through your charts and you're like, this is what my goal is, this is when I have time to plant, and you find the cover crop that's going to work. Pay attention to when you're going to terminate, how you're going to terminate, and make sure to give yourself plenty of time to terminate that cover crop so that you're not having microbes stealing nutrients from your veggies or whatever you're putting in to break down that cover crop. That's usually we can see some nitrogen deficiencies early spring that way. So timing all around is important. If you're planting at the right time, if you're terminating at the right time, which can make this all seem very hard and like difficult to do. So choose something easy. Like I always think turnips, radishes, like those are all easy. They're going to rot in the ground. In my opinion, they're easy. They're going to rot in the ground. They're not hard to terminate. And so if you want to do something, you can do that, or wait till summer and try you some buckwheat, because you can't go wrong when it
Yes.
comes to buckwheat. It's fast and easy and get your feet wet in the cover crop area, but don't feel forced into doing this. If you're tired, just make sure your soil is covered in some way with mulch or plastic or something. If it means that you're covering it with letting purple henbit cover it, that's fine.
And
Just
now's the time of the year to be thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. So you're
Maybe
getting
a little crabgrass.
You can come get mine. You can come get it from my place, and let me just write my address down for you. But yeah, cover it with something. It's kind of the gist of all this is just take care of your soil, and it'll take care of you and your goals for whatever scale you're doing.
So I wonder if I can sum us up in about a minute here.
Go for it.
On what we've said. So now is the time of year to be thinking about getting a cover crop in if you're wanting to have one through the fall and winter. Some things you might want to think about are a grass and a legume, and maybe a combination of multiple of those. So something like wheat or rye, plus maybe a vetch or a clover. If you can get your soil bed prepared after your crop has come out for the year, your regular crop, your vegetables, your flowers, or whatever, get that seed down through whatever way that you're going to do that, and then in some way try to pack it into that prepared seed bed.
Mm-hmm.
The rain comes, the magic happens, it germinates, it grows. Enjoy, rest with the trees, watch the green grow. In the spring, as you're planning out your garden and you're thinking about your planting dates and when you're going to want to get in, I would say take a step back probably 6 to 4 weeks before, or 4 to 6 weeks before you're going to try to get in. Around here, that means we're going to start paying attention to the weather and see if we're going to get anything that looks remotely like a dry spell for us to be able to get in there and work. At that point, and that month ahead of time before you're trying to get into that area, in some way figure out how you're going to terminate your crop, whether that be with a weed eater or a mower, or cover it with something or crimp it or whatever, and try to get in there and do that to give yourself ample time for it to break down ahead of planting into it for the garden for next year.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I love cover crops so much. I actually, there's a part of me that wanted to just kind of stop growing vegetables and just grow like a sequence of cover crops.
Totally.
It would be a worthy endeavor, Brett. So
I used to think about it in terms of like animal agriculture, just growing cover crop stands and then turning animals into it.
Yeah. I just want to get them right. And I get so like caught up in like the cash crop of it all that I never get it. And it makes me so mad because I'm like, one of these days I'm going to have the most beautiful crimson clover there is. And it is not going to be this year, you guys. So, yes, but I think it's time for us to get out of here. And with that, make sure that if you are on social media, if you're on Instagram, you can follow us at Hort Culture Podcast. If you would like to shoot us an email, if you've got questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, you can
especially concerns. You can
email us at hortculturepodcast@l.uky.edu. That is also in the show notes. If you want to leave us a review that helps other people find us, we would greatly appreciate that. And hopefully it'll be a good review. Yeah. Leave us a review if it's a 5-star review, period. That's me telling you today. But anyways, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and join us next week. We are talking about season extension because, timeliness of it all. Thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you soon.